These 10 hacks will make you a master at editing your photos in Lightroom. And without further ado, cue intro. What's up guys, my name is Isaiah and I help content creators level up their production game. And today we're gonna be talking about 10 Lightroom hacks that'll help you get the cleanest edit for your photos. Tip number 1 is gonna help you get the perfect exposure for your photos so that you're not clipping in your highlights. So I'm gonna show you what that looks like. Alright, so we have this beautiful photo of a Subaru BRZ. And as you can see, it's a little bit underexposed, but it's perfectly well exposed as you can see over here. Just a little bit moody and a little bit dark in the blacks and in the shadows. So first we're just gonna check for exposure and make sure nothing's clipping. And how we do that is we're gonna hit Option and we're gonna click the slider. And when you click the slider, your screen will go black. That's okay, it's supposed to happen. But when you drag the slider up, you'll start to see what's clipping. And what I mean by clipping in your highlights is when you start to see reds and you start to see the areas that are appearing in your photo, those are the areas that are super overexposed. And essentially there's no detail in it. And that's what you don't want because as you can see, it looks like garbage, right? But when we reset it, we can see that the photo in and of itself is perfectly exposed. So we can just kind of bring it up ever so slightly to taste. And while we're doing that, when we get it to taste, we can just drag the slider and bring it back to the number that we liked it at, which is 64, and just make sure nothing's clipping. As you can see, this area, and some parts over here were clipping, but that's not that big of a deal. You can still see them, and it's not way overexposed or destroyed just in the detail aspect of it. All right, so tip number 2 is pretty much a subcategory of the first one, but this is just focusing in on the highlights. So let me show you what that looks like. All right, so we're back in the panel over here for the lighting panel, and we're gonna do the same thing. We're gonna hit Option, and we're gonna click on the highlights. And we're just gonna make sure if we want just the highlights brought down, we can bring just the highlights down. And now we know technically nothing in the photo is clipping, but like I said before, it's all to taste. And at the end of the day, it's what you see with your eye that's really matters. So if it looks good, that's okay if it's clipping a little bit, as long as it's not horrible and super blown out, super washed out. So I'm just gonna drag it around, make sure that I like where it's at. Honestly, I would probably just leave it where it's at 0 because I kind of like where it sits right now, so to speak, for exposure and stuff like that. But I think we're off to a great start, so on to the next tip. All right, so tip number 3 is the antithesis of exposure, and we're gonna be checking the black tones in our images. So let's check out and see if make sure I'm not clipping in any of my blacks. So obviously off rip, I'm 100% sure I'm not clipping in my blacks because I actually feel like there should be more contrast in it. But if we did want to check if we were clipping in our blacks, we would go over here to the black slider. We would hit Option and click the slider, and the screen's gonna turn white because we're checking for black, so it's gonna turn white, but this is the extreme of it. So obviously this is way too dark and stuff like that, but technically I'm not clipping and I keep bringing it down. And as you can see, the bottom, this is where the shadows are coming in under the car and under the tires. So I'm not so worried about that. But at the end of the day, I just wanna see how it looks with my eye, because at the end of the day, because that's what we're gonna see in the final product. So I'm gonna release the Option button. I'm gonna check what it looks like before and after, and honestly, I actually like it a little darker, right? It looks good. So I'm gonna keep it right there, and we're gonna move on to the next tip. All right, so tip number 4, it's more of a precision technique when you're using your curves panel and you have like an S curve, but you don't want it to be too black and you don't want to make too big of an adjustment. You want it just ever so slightly darker in the shadows or brighter in the highlights. This is how you would do that. So we would go over here to the point curves tabs, and we would do a 3-point curve. And so let's say I wanted to make the photo more contrasty. This is how you would do that with precision and getting it dialed into exactly where you want it. So you would hit the Option or Alt key, and you would hit your slider, and you would bring it down ever so slightly. And you may be saying, hey, look, it's pretty much the same thing as before, right? No, it's not. Watch. So as you can see, I'm dragging it up and down, and you see how slightly it's moving? And this is with me without clicking Option. You see the difference? So this tool just helps you dial in exactly where you want it without making too big of an adjustment. So let's say you already have the photo where you want it, but you don't want to affect things too much. This is how you would do that and get just enough of what you need in the photo as it like relates to exposure and stuff like that. All right, so tip number 5. Now we're gonna have some fun because we get to add a preset. But we're not just slapping on a preset and just dialing it and doing all the crazy adjustments. No, we're not doing that. What's cool in Lightroom now is when you add a preset, you can actually adjust the amount of the preset that you want on the photo. All right, so let me show you what that looks like. So we're going to go over here. We're going to go to presets, and we're going to go to, I think it was seaweed. So this preset's a little bit too heavy for me, and I kind of don't really like it. I actually liked it where it was without a preset, but let's say we just wanted more stylization in the coloring of the photo. Maybe we just want the mood of how the preset actually applies to it. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna click seaweed, and right at the bottom, right here, it says amount. So I'm able to adjust the amount. So this is what it would look like before without a preset, and we would just slide it up ever so slightly, and we can get the perfect blend of where we want it at. And the reason why I like this is it's not just like a a one and done thing where you go and take a photo and then you come back and then you put a preset on and you're like, crap, it's either too overexposed or maybe the photo looked flat in my camera, but when I added the preset, it made the black super dark and the highlights were blown out and it just didn't, it looked like super matte. It just had this weird like faded kind of look to it, and no, we don't have to do that anymore. We can adjust the amount that we want and then adjust the curve tones of the image so that we can get the perfect exposure and the perfect style that we want with it. So for example, for me, I would probably bring it down a little bit more to like 30%. So this is what before looks like. This is what after looks like. It's just a little bit more tint, but I just don't like how, if you actually see right here in this area, it just adds a little bit more fade to the car, which I don't like. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna come over to the color mixer tab and I'm just gonna bring down the luminance of the car, but not too much. I'm probably just gonna zero it out. Maybe bump up the aquas a little bit. But yeah, that's pretty much the tip. It's the amount tips, and it's really gonna help, especially if you wanted to blend in the Rec 709 profile with a preset from another artist that you like or photographer that you like, so you can get like the perfect blend of style that you want in the photo. This is a great way to do that. All right, so the next one's gonna help with, layering your photos. And what I mean by that is you're gonna be able to create masks to edit certain parts of your photo. So right now we're just gonna focus on subject selection for the mask. So I'm gonna show you how to do that. So if you come over here to the tab over here, we're going to hit masking. And when you hit masking, it already has it beautifully set up for you. It has subject, it has sky, and it has background. All you have to do is click it and it'll automatically select it for you. So here we go, one click, and boom. Literally in like a second or two, it automatically selects your subject so that you can make adjustments only to your subject without affecting the rest of the photo. So for me, I would like the subject of this photo to be a little bit more bright because your eye is attracted to brightness. So I would pop it up just a little bit, and I would bring up the contrast a little bit, and I would drop the shadows a little bit. Probably drop down the exposure just a little bit more, maybe 62. All right, so I want more detail in the car, so I'm bringing up the shadow, and I'm just trying to balance it out and just bringing up the contrast of the image. And I'm happy with that. I think that looks pretty good. But that masking will also help, let's say if I just wanted the photo to pop out a little bit more or the subject to be a little bit more sharper, you can do that here just by adding the mask, and you can literally affect the photo in any way and it wouldn't, mess up the background or the surrounding of the actual image. Or so let's say for automotive, let's say I wanted to just make the car a little bit smoother and add a little bit more luminance to it. I can add noise reduction just a little bit and it'll smooth out those imperfections just a little bit, and I can add sharpness to that. But that's the beauty, and these are just a little bit of examples of the power of subject select in Lightroom, because it honestly takes away from me having to go to Photoshop and select it and then make my edits from there. It just keeps me in one platform and it's super clutch. So subject select, great tool. On to the next one. All right, so this tip is another masking tip, but instead of selecting the subject, we're actually going to be inverting the subject select so that we can just affect the background of the photo. So I'm going to show you how to do that. So first we're going to come over to mask and we're going to go to the current mask. This is important. We're going to go to the current mask that we already have, and we're going to click the three dots on the right, and we're going to go duplicate and invert mask. Now, the reason why I do it this way and I just don't go to the AI one and select background is you've already selected the subject in the photo. So to be able to get the perfect mask that's already locked down with no weird halo effects around the subject and stuff like that you normally get if you do it separately, if you invert it this way, there's literally no separation between the masks because it's literally perfectly aligned with the subject that you already have masked. So that way it's perfectly blended and it's a nice crossfade in between the two masks so that you can just affect just the background of your photo. Let's do some edits and I'll show you how it kind of works. So we did that, we have the background selected, and let's see what I want to do with the photo. So maybe I feel like it's a little too faded over here. This is just personal preference, but I'm gonna bring down the blacks a little bit just so we can get more punch out of the photo, because I have like very contrasty, punchy photos. So as you can see, it definitely brought a little bit more moodiness to the photo. And in actuality, it made the subject pop out more because I made the background darker. So essentially it's like bringing the exposure down in the background and having the spotlight on the car, but just doing it with masking. So I like it where it's at. And here's a cool thing. If you wanted more compression out of the current photo that you have, obviously you can't zoom into another lens because you already shot the photo. But what you could do is you could just make the background more blurry with the masking selection that we did. So I'm gonna show you how to do that. So if you wanted a more blurry background, personally, I would just come down to sharpness, bring down the sharpness all the way. And then I would also bring down the clarity just a wee bit. And as you can see, I'll show you the before and after. This is before. Look at the background. You can see how much more in focus it is. And then here's after. You can see that the car pops out more, the background is a little bit darker, but it's also a lot more blurry. So it gives off the impression that you're shooting at a much higher f-stop than you actually were. So I like the photo where it's at. On to the next tip. All right, so tip number 8. I actually switched it up a little bit on you guys because I needed a better example to show you how to use this tool, which is called the spot healing tool. So essentially you have this perfect example of a photo for the spot healing brush. So let's say you zoom in and you start to see like these little freckles on her. So essentially what you do is you would come into the spot healing brush, you'd hit healing tool, and then you would just zoom in. I would keep it feathered up just so you can get a smoother, more blended in selection, so it's not just like a hard circle when you have it like not feathered. So I'm gonna come in, I'm gonna zoom in, I'm gonna bring my mask way down in size, and I'm just gonna select, click, boom. It's literally that easy. The software does its thing, and you just literally go around and select whatever areas that you want to remove. So let's say I just wanted to remove most of them but not all of them to kind of just make it look a little bit more realistic. Maybe go over here, remove the pimple on the chin, move over here, remove over here. Essentially this is the before and after. So this is before and this is after. And this is just a quick way to clean up your photos, whether it's spots on a shirt or lint or dust, or maybe there's some scratches on a car, or maybe you're just wanting to make the face without any imperfections, without any blemishes. Like, this is a great tool that you can use. I do say so for automotive stuff, and when things start to get a little bit more complex. In Lightroom, that spot healing brush tool is probably not the best for it. That's why I would go into Photoshop and export my photo into Photoshop and use that spot healing brush, because that one's phenomenal. It'll blow your mind. And you also have generative AI, so if you did want to remove like a section of blemishes, like you can do that with the AI tools that it has in Photoshop. But if you're just doing minor adjustments and just kind of removing spots and pimples and things like that, this is a great tool to have in your arsenal, and it just speeds up the workflow a little bit rather than having to jump back and forth and export and re-export and then bring it back into Lightroom and then do all this stuff. It's just a lot easier to just use a spot healing brush for minor adjustments. Yeah, it's a great tool. On to the next one. All right, so tip number 9, and that's using the texture tool in a mask selection to make skin smoother. So I'm gonna show you how to do that. Okay, so I already made my mask, and essentially if I wanted to remove all these wrinkles and all that stuff, you can do it with the spot healing brush, but it can be a little bit more time consuming, and I'd rather do that after I've smoothed out all the imperfections. And the way you would do that is after you made your selection over here, you would come over to the texture tab in the effects, and you would just drag it down until pretty much those wrinkles disappear. And I'll show you the before and after. Here's before, and then here's after. And it doesn't look fake at all. Like, it doesn't look crazy like I airbrushed or painted on in Photoshop or anything like that. It looks pretty real, and it's actually very smooth. And obviously the great thing about this is you have the texture slider, so you can mix it in to taste. So if you didn't want it to be perfectly smooth and you wanted it to pop out just a little bit more, you can honestly bring it back and just kind of bring a little bit more texture back. But that tool is really helpful, and it gets a lot of the groundwork done so that when you do export it into Photoshop, if you want to, the editing time will just be so much quicker because you did all the legwork in Lightroom. That's tip number 9. On to the last one. All right, so last tip, which is number 10, I'm gonna be showing you how to adjust the white balance to get the perfect color temperature for your photo. And this could be the difference between night and day, and it also is preference. So one way isn't better and one way isn't worse. And here's the thing, sometimes you may adjust your white balance and you actually may not like the selection, so that's okay. And a lot of times this should be done before, but I like to do it after because you already have all your colors in place, you have all your tones in place, so I like to do it after, but it's all preference. Let me show you how to do that. So what you would do is go to your tabs, so you go to your edit tab, you come all the way down here and you would go into color. And there's a little eyedropper tool over here that you would use, and you just click that, and it'll show a little crosshair, and you want to get to the whitest part of the photo. Sometimes if it goes too white, it says it can't read it, so just kind of find a place where you can actually get some adjustment to it. So I think like right around here, and I would come over to the whitest part of the photo and I would click it. And as you can see, it didn't really change much. Like, there was only like, they added a little bit more magenta into it, but honestly I could personally live without it. The only thing that I would probably end up doing in this photo is just bring up the vibrance, because I like the tones. It's got dark rich tones, it's got good color, it's balanced very well. I would probably bring up the overall vibrance of the colors just to give it a little bit more pop. So I would come over here to the vibrance tab and, you know, just do it by taste. And I'm happy with that. But that's it, guys. 10 Lightroom tips to step up your photo editing game. And that's all I got for today. I hope you liked the photo. Like, subscribe, do all the YouTube things, follow me on Instagram, and I'll see you on the next video. Peace.